Welcome to Screen Hollywood, the home of movie news and entertainment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I'm not seeing ancient Greece. I'm seeing Tom Holland. I'm seeing Zendaya. I'm seeing Robert Pattinson. I'm seeing celebrity, and that's a problem. And that's before you throw in rappers. The casting looks cherry-picked for current trends and erratic. In reality, I'm not convinced. The moment audiences start noticing the actors instead of the characters, the costumes instead of the world, or the dialogue instead of the story, you've already begun losing the magic. What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Screen Hollywood. Christopher Nolan is a director who has spent the last 2 decades doing what very few filmmakers ever achieve, earning the trust of audiences. Whether it's The Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, or his Oscar-winning masterpiece Oppenheimer, Nolan has built a reputation for delivering cinematic events that demand to be seen on the biggest screen possible. That's why there's so much excitement surrounding his next project, the Odyssey. But for the first time in a long time, I'm looking at one of Christopher Nolan's movies with genuine concern. Now, before anyone rushes to the comment section, let's make one thing clear. I'm not saying this movie is going to be bad. In fact, I think there are going to be moments in this film that will absolutely blow audiences away. Christopher Nolan is simply too talented a filmmaker not to produce unforgettable sequences. But great set pieces don't automatically make a great movie. And after everything we've seen so far, I think The Odyssey could become Christopher Nolan's most divisive film in years. So let's talk about why. The pressure has never been higher. Following Oppenheimer was never going to be easy. That film wasn't just commercially successful, it became a cultural phenomenon. It won Oscars. It dominated conversations. It proved that audiences would still turn out in huge numbers for intelligent filmmaking. Naturally, expectations for Nolan's next project have gone through the roof. And when you're adapting one of the greatest stories ever written, expectations climb even higher. The Odyssey isn't just another historical adventure. It's one of the foundations of Western literature. It's a story that's inspired countless books, television series, movies, and video games. When you adapt something with that level of history behind it, every creative decision is going to be scrutinized. And that's exactly what's happening. The casting is my biggest concern. Let's get straight to what, for me, is the elephant in the room: the casting. Christopher Nolan has assembled an absolutely enormous cast filled with some of the biggest names working in Hollywood today. On paper, that sounds incredible. In reality, I'm not convinced. One of the strengths of many historical epics is that audiences disappear into the world. You stop seeing actors. You start believing you're watching kings, warriors, and legends. Here, I'm having the opposite reaction. Every time I see promotional material, I'm not seeing ancient Greece. I'm seeing Tom Holland. I'm seeing Zendaya. I'm seeing Robert Pattinson. I'm seeing celebrity, and that's a problem. And that's before you throw in rappers. The casting looks cherry-picked for current trends and erratic. I'm even questioning Matt Damon, and I like Matt Damon, because immersion is everything in a film like this. Star power can sometimes work against a film. Now, don't misunderstand me. This isn't a criticism of these actors, far from it. Tom Holland has proven himself to be enormously charismatic. Robert Pattinson has reinvented himself into one of Hollywood's most interesting performers. Zendaya continues to impress with almost everything she appears in. Individually, they're fantastic. Collectively, I'm not convinced they're right for this particular story. Sometimes casting the biggest stars in the world actually makes it harder for audiences to believe the world they're stepping into. Instead of disappearing into Homer's mythology, I keep feeling like I'm watching a collection of A-list celebrities wearing period costumes. For me, that's a distraction. Then there's the Travis Scott question. Perhaps the casting decision that's generated the most discussion is Travis Scott. Again, this isn't personal. He's an incredibly successful musician. But when I think of Homer's Odyssey, he isn't someone who naturally comes to mind. Maybe he'll surprise everybody. Christopher Nolan has certainly earned the benefit of the doubt over the years, but based purely on first impressions, this feels like one of the more unusual casting choices of his career. And because the cast is already packed with recognizable faces, It adds to the feeling that star power has sometimes taken priority over creating a believable world. Another issue that's been difficult for me to ignore is authenticity. Historical epics don't need to be documentaries. Creative license is part of filmmaking. Everyone understands that. But there still needs to be a sense that the filmmakers are trying to transport audiences somewhere believable. From what we've seen so far, I'm struggling with that immersion. Some costume designs don't immediately evoke the world I imagined while reading about ancient Greece. Certain visual choices feel closer to modern fantasy than classical mythology. Even some of the dialogue we've heard in promotional material sounds surprisingly contemporary. Again, none of these issues automatically ruin a movie, but they all chip away at the illusion. And cinema, especially epic cinema, relies on illusion. The moment audiences start noticing the actors instead of the characters, the costumes instead of the world, or the dialogue instead of the story, you've already begun losing the magic. One thing I've been thinking about is whether Hollywood has become overly dependent on recognizable names. Studios understandably want big stars because they help market films. But sometimes, the greatest casting decisions are the unexpected ones. Actors who disappear completely into their roles. Faces that become the character, not celebrities playing dress-up. For me, the Odyssey feels like it's leaning heavily into blockbuster branding. It's a cast designed to generate headlines before anyone has even seen a single frame of the finished movie. Whether that ultimately helps or hurts the film remains to be seen, but from where I'm sitting, I'm not entirely convinced. One thing that has fascinated me over the past few months is just how much conversation the Odyssey has generated before audiences have even had the chance to watch it. Normally, when Christopher Nolan announces a new film, the reaction is almost universal excitement. This time, it's been very different. Every trailer, every casting announcement, every promotional image has sparked another wave of debate online. Some fans are questioning the casting. Others are debating historical authenticity. Some are discussing the costumes. Others are focusing on the accents. And that's what makes this project so interesting. For perhaps the first time in years, Christopher Nolan doesn't seem completely untouchable. For the last decade, he's enjoyed something very few directors ever experience. People automatically assumed his next movie would be another masterpiece. Now, that confidence doesn't feel quite as universal. And whether that's fair or not, it changes the conversation surrounding the film before a single cinema ticket has even been scanned. Let's go back to the cast for a moment because I genuinely think this could become one of the defining talking points once the film is released. There's a difference between assembling a talented cast and assembling a cast full of celebrities. Those aren't always the same thing. When you look back at some of cinema's greatest historical epics, yes, they featured famous actors, but those actors disappeared into the world. Here, I worry the opposite may happen. When I watch the trailers, I'm constantly reminded that these are Hollywood stars. I'm not transported into ancient Greece. I'm reminded of Marvel, Batman, Euphoria, Dune, Spider-Man. Every actor arrives carrying the weight of another iconic role. That baggage is difficult to ignore. Instead of watching Odysseus and legendary heroes, I'm watching actors I've spent years seeing in completely different universes play dress-up. And what adds insult to injury, they all have American accents. Aren't you paid enough to at least act and pretend to be native? Apologies, I thought that was what actors do. For some viewers, that won't matter. For me, it absolutely does. One criticism I have of modern Hollywood in general, not just the Odyssey, is that studios often believe bigger automatically means better. Bigger casts, bigger budgets, bigger visual effects, bigger action. But storytelling doesn't work like that. Some of the greatest films ever made are surprisingly intimate. They succeed because they make audiences emotionally invest in their characters. That's my biggest concern here. Will we actually care about these characters, or will we simply admire the spectacle unfolding on screen? Christopher Nolan has always been brilliant at scale. No one creates cinematic moments quite like he does. The docking sequence in Interstellar, the hallway fight in Inception, the truck flip in The Dark Knight, the the Trinity test in Oppenheimer. Those moments are unforgettable. I have absolutely no doubt the Odyssey will feature scenes we'll be talking about for years. But great scenes alone don't guarantee a great movie. They need to be supported by characters audiences genuinely care about. Let me put it in perspective. When I believe Hollywood has got things close to right with casting. When I watched Gladiator, I believed I was in ancient Rome. When I watched Braveheart, I believed I was in medieval Scotland. When I watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I completely forgot I was watching actors. That's immersion. That's movie magic. Now that's what I'm talking about. Now, I also want to be fair. If there's one filmmaker who deserves the benefit of the doubt, it's Christopher Nolan. He's proved people wrong before, time and time again. Every time critics questioned one of his ideas, he somehow made it work. So, could the Odyssey completely exceed my expectations? Absolutely. I'd actually love it to. Because regardless of what I think today, I want this movie to succeed. Despite the race and sex swapping of Helena and Achilles, which was bad and dated decisions by the way, the cinema industry needs ambitious directors making ambitious films. Hollywood needs original filmmaking. And Christopher Nolan has consistently championed that. So nothing would make me happier than walking out of the cinema saying, I got this completely wrong, it was amazing. But based purely on everything we've seen so far, I'm not convinced. My early prediction. No one knows how audiences are ultimately going to respond until the film is released. But I do wonder whether the Odyssey could become one of Christopher Nolan's more divisive projects. Not because it lacks ambition, quite the opposite. Sometimes enormous ambition creates equally enormous expectations. When audiences expect perfection, anything less can feel disappointing. That's the position this film finds itself in. Christopher Nolan has raised the bar so incredibly high throughout his career that every new project is expected to redefine cinema. That's almost impossible for any filmmaker to achieve every single time. If The Odyssey ends up being just a very good film, some people may still view that as a disappointment simply because it's Christopher Nolan. That's the burden that comes with greatness. This film will be no Gladiator or Lord of the Rings. No chance. So where do I stand right now? At this stage, I'm cautiously skeptical. I think Christopher Nolan will undoubtedly deliver breathtaking visuals. I think there will be unforgettable action sequences. I think the scale will be absolutely immense. But I'm struggling to see a cast that disappears into Homer's world. Instead, I see Hollywood's biggest names sharing the screen. For me, that's the biggest obstacle. It's not about talent, it's about immersion. Historical epics ask audiences to believe they're witnessing another time, another civilization, and another world. The more I'm reminded of celebrity, the harder that becomes. Maybe Christopher Nolan has another masterpiece waiting for us. Maybe this will become one of the defining films of the decade. I genuinely hope that's the case. But based on everything we've seen so far, I'm approaching this one with more caution than excitement. And honestly, that's something I never thought I'd say about a Christopher Nolan movie. But that's just my opinion. Now I want to hear yours. Do you think Christopher Nolan has assembled the perfect cast for The Odyssey? Or do you think Hollywood has become too reliant on star power at the expense of authenticity? And perhaps the biggest question of all, do you believe The Odyssey has what it takes to become Christopher Nolan's next cinematic masterpiece? Or do you think this could end up being one of his most divisive films? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below because we genuinely love to hear where you stand. If you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to Screen Hollywood, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest movie reviews, Hollywood news, box office analysis, and entertainment discussions. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, this is Screen Hollywood signing off. See you in the next one.